Hello. This is our 23rd teaching under the title Present Absent 48 Palestinians. It's a series, and this is the second installment in the series after we had talked to Adi Johnny Mansour this past week, and he addressed a number of cases and measures taken to suppress and silence Palestinians, not least in academic and circles, whether faculty and students and beyond. Today, we will be discussing conditional citizens with Diana Buttu, whom I will introduce more formally in just a second. We also have a third installment happening next Thursday at 1 p.m. With other scholars addressing the topic from different angles. We will have a panel, actually. In the meantime, we are reminding everyone that this is a collaborative project comprised of 22 plus research institutions and university centers. We are very excited to be able to do this continuously for the past several months, and you can find all the material regarding this particular project on PalestineAndContext.org. So I'll introduce Diana and we will get right to it. And I will be brief because Diana's accomplishments and her work and experience is vast. So I will address a few matters. Diana is a Palestinian-Canadian lawyer and analyst based in Haifa and a communications director to the Institute for Middle East Understanding. Diana previously worked as a legal advisor to the Palestinian negotiation team. Diana was one of the lawyers who challenged the legality of Israel's apartheid wall before the International Court of Justice in the early 2000s. She is a frequent commentator and writer on Palestine, with articles appearing in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the Guardian, Foreign Policy, as well as other major U.S. papers. She holds degrees from University of Toronto, Queen's University, Kellogg Northwestern, and Stanford Law School. Ms. Buttu has held fellowships at Stanford and Harvard. I will stop here and reintroduce Diana. Ahlan wa sahlan, Diana. Thank you for joining us. Hope you're feeling much better.
Thank you, I am. Thank you.
This is a very, very important topic. A lot of the topics are, but this one is one that is brought up incessantly when there is conversation on the status of Palestinians in Israel proper. And the idea is that Palestinians are citizens and therefore they enjoy everything that all the other citizens, namely Jewish citizens, enjoy. So we'll be addressing various aspects, but I'll give you the floor to introduce the topic, and then we will have a conversation. I will be able to field questions to the extent that we have time. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bassam. Thanks. And thanks for hosting this. I think it's such a great idea to host more than one because it is such a vast topic. And I want to thank you and everybody who's put work into this. These teach-ins are incredible. They're an incredible resource. And I think are going to last for some time. They'll be used for some time. So in terms of the issue of Palestinians in Israel, it's always a little bit awkward for me to speak about it. For the simple reason that I wasn't born there. I was born in Canada. I was raised in Canada. I was educated in Canada. And I only moved to 48 in the early 2000s. So for me, my formative years, my childhood was entirely in Canada, which is its own issue. But I wasn't born and raised and have to live under the daily grind of being somebody who, during their formative years, sees the everyday racism. And there is everyday racism. So it's always a little bit uncomfortable for me to speak about it, but at the same time, I think it's important for people to speak about it and to hear about it. So in terms of this idea of conditional citizenship, there's a myth that is out there, which is that Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship are full citizens. And that is a myth. And the reason that it is a myth is because it's both enshrined in law and enshrined in practice that Palestinians are not full citizens. And to be quite honest, it's you're asking Palestinians to be full citizens of a very racist state. And so I'll get into it. The Palestinians who currently hold Israeli citizenship are the descendants of the mere 150,000 Palestinians who were not ethnically cleansed in 1948. Today, the number is close to 2 million. But those 150,000 that remained in the aftermath of the Nakba were not exactly welcomed in, and certainly not exactly absorbed in. And instead, from the period of 1948 until 1966, they were placed under a system of military rule. That military rule did not apply to Jewish citizens of the state, and most of them were immigrants, but they did apply to Palestinians who, let's be clear, Palestinians didn't immigrate to Israel. Israel came to the Palestinians. And so from that period of 48 until 1966, that same system that we see today in the West Bank, the same system of occupation, the same system of control existed in Palestinian cities and towns for Palestinian citizens of Israel. What did that mean in practice? It meant that if you were like my parents, both of my parents were born in Palestine before Israel, before the Nakba. It meant that in order to leave your town to go, for example, from Nazareth to go to Haifa, you needed to have an Israeli permit. It wasn't as though movement of people was free. You were constantly under a series of military laws, everything that from restricting movement to restricting speech to restricting all sorts of activities. Now, in the aftermath, in 1966, when military rule ends, it's really actually just, Bassam, it's such a fascinating thing when you look at it. It's only about 7 months between the period that military rule ends and that a new military rule begins with Israel occupying the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So military rule ends in October of 66, and then military rule against the West Bank and Gaza Strip begins in June of 67. So all of Israel is really, their entire experience has been just as occupiers under a system of emergency laws, and always in a place and space where Palestinians are made to feel as though we are interlopers, as though we don't belong, as though this isn't our country, as though they didn't finish the job. And why is this so important? Because if you fast forward today, 75 years later from the Nakba, Israeli leaders are still talking about how they didn't finish the job in 1948. And they are constantly telling us that the only reason that we still remain in the country is because Israel didn't finish the job in 1948. Now, this predates October the 7th. These are statements by Smotrich that predated, but before he was even elected, before he became a minister. And one of the Israeli ministers, Itamar Ben-Gvir, ran a whole campaign saying, we need to show people who is the owner of the house, who is the master of the house. So if you think of the terms of master, then by definition, there's a servant. And this is the way that Israel thinks of Palestinians. And it's not just in terms of the actual racism, but it goes far beyond that. And Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship have often been the targets of Israel's wrath. So, for example, Avigdor Lieberman, who used to be one of Israel's foreign ministers, he at one point in time had campaigned on an election platform in which he said, no loyalty, no citizenship. And of course, when he's talking about loyalty, he's not talking about the loyalty of Jewish citizens of the state. He's instead talking about the loyalty, the so-called loyalty of Palestinians in the country. And so with that, what Israel has been looking for since 1948 is that somehow Palestinians should just simply accept Zionism. We should just accept the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. We should accept that Israel has destroyed entire communities, separated families, destroyed houses, turned us overnight into being second-class citizens in our own country. They're expecting that somehow this is going to be accepted, and not just accepted, but appreciated. So this idea of conditional citizenship started as early as 1948 and continues to this very day. And of course, it didn't just end with Avigdor Lieberman talking about no loyalty, no citizenship. But it then continues further. And throughout these 75 years, Israel has gone out of its way to build upon this idea of conditionality and place further conditions on Palestinians. For example, most recently, for a long time, there have been attempts to try to, on the part of Israeli lawmakers, to strip Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship of their citizenship. And this has been done in a wide variety of ways. It's never fully passed. And yet now, since 2023, since this new government came into office a little over a year ago, one of the first things that the government did was to pass legislation, or to focus on passing legislation, to strip any Palestinians who've ever been in an Israeli prison and who, as they put it, accepted funds from the Palestinian Authority, to strip them of their citizenship. But it goes even further than that. We've also seen that in the various times where there were negotiations or talks between Israel and the PLO, that again, other proposals were always about Israel ridding itself of Palestinians. In other words, we are not only considered a demographic threat for them, but we're a demographic threat that makes the Jewish state of Israel impure. And so they've often dreamed up ways of how to get rid of Palestinians. And we saw this even play itself out with the Trump plan, when Trump openly talked about Umm al-Fahim and the Triangle and all those areas becoming part of the Palestinian state, so that Israel could rid itself of Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship. More recently, we've seen in the aftermath of October 7th, and we'll talk about that, even more of this happening, but I'll save that until then. But Bassam, it's not just the way in which lawmakers approach Palestinians in terms of like the thinking and gaining popularity, because they get a lot of popularity at the polls whenever they try to beat up on us. Like, for example, we've seen Avigdor Lieberman say that the heads of Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship should be chopped off. We've heard in the past Naftali Bennett say to Ahmed Tibi that while they were building a Jewish state, that Arabs were swinging in trees. So this like racist stuff has always been there, but it's also prevalent. It's also enshrined in law. Israel defines itself as a Jewish state. And in 2018, with the passage of the Jewish nation state law, it further entrenched this idea of Israel being a Jewish state, which therefore, by definition, means that non-Jews don't have the same rights. And I know we're going to go into this even further. There are laws on the books that have this distinction based on whether you're Jewish or not Jewish. But even more importantly than that, the ways in which the Israeli Supreme Court has interpreted the rights of Palestinians when faced with this issue of, is Israel a democracy, or is Israel a Jewish state? It's always sided with this idea that Israel's a Jewish state, and therefore it can discriminate against, infringe upon Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship. The sum total, of course, is that the way that Israel views Palestinians is that unless you are willing to swallow what Israel did in 1948, unless you're willing to accept wholeheartedly the Nakba and somehow view it as okay or justifiable, you are always under watch, under threat, and your citizenship is always conditional, with lawmakers often speaking about the problem of Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship. So I'm going to pause there because I know you and I wanted to have a little bit more of a conversation rather than me having a monologue. So,
No, thank you. Thanks for this introduction. I'd like to get into basically a timeline since October 7th and what have Palestinians living in Israel been facing and how it has progressed or changed over time. But first, I'd like to ask you a nomenclature type of question. What is the term or phrase that Palestinians living in Israel, Palestinians, citizens of Israel, use to refer to themselves, and what are some of the terms that are avoided or that you think are better to be avoided? Because this is something that comes up and people wonder, even when we were titling this particular series, we called them Palestinians of 48, Palestinian citizens of Israel, but I'd like to hear your take.
sure. So I'll start with the what not to say, and then we can go to the what to say. So the what not to well, I'll just keep going.
One
Maybe,
second. Hold
yeah.
on. I can figure it out in 2 seconds if this. Yes. I apologize, Diana, and to everyone. Yeah, we're back.
Go
So,
back.
well, the
Okay.
question was, how should we refer to? I apologize. You might have to repeat that because it didn't get recorded anywhere except locally here. So basically, the question was, how should we refer to Palestinian citizens of Israel or Palestinians living in Israel, and what are the terms to avoid? So,
Okay.
so you had some really good practice right now.
Yes, and it's
Right.
recorded in our minds, which is all that matters. Anyway, so what I was saying is the terms to avoid: Arab Israeli, Israeli Arab. Why? Because both of those, because my identity predates Israel and is not defined by Israel. And the use of the term Israeli Arab, Arab Israeli, it's an Israeli term, and the reason that they use it is to try to strip us of our identity, of our nationality, of who we are, which is Palestinians. Remember, Israel has always tried to get rid of the people, hold on to the land, and erase any idea that there was anything ever known as Palestine. And that's why they replaced the names of Palestinian cities with Israeli ones. They've wiped houses off the map, wiped entire cities, towns off the map, and villages, and so on. And so they also want to wipe our identity off the map. So using the term Israeli Arab or Arab Israeli is exactly that term. To do that, that's exactly the tool that they use to strip us of our identity. Then other people will say Palestinians of 48. This is something I will use quite often. Again, because we are the Palestinians who remained in the aftermath of the Nakba, and we live within the borders of 48. And sometimes you also hear the term Palestinian citizens of Israel or Palestinians in Israel. The main thing is, obviously each person can decide for themselves what their identity is and how they choose to identify themselves. But I've yet to find somebody who prefers the term Israeli Arab or Arab Israeli, because of those reasons that I mentioned. The idea that our only identity, we only exist because of Israel. We don't exist because of Israel. Our identity predates it. I'm a Palestinian Arab, Palestinian because I'm part of the Palestinian nation, and Arab because I'm part of the Arab nation as well. And that's the way that I prefer to identify myself and many others. I can't hear you now, Bassam.
Can we talk a little bit about the timeline, the basic timeline after October 7th, and the idea that I would like you to address what happened after October 7th in terms of the status of Palestinians living in Israel,
Yeah.
given that so much of what we used to talk about in terms of the status of Palestinians in Israel before October 7th, including the practices and the regulations that are sort of invisible, that are not necessarily on the books, have actually come to life and have been exacerbated dramatically. Can you share with us what happened in this regard since October 7th and the extent to which things have gotten worse or have subsided or have been constant after October 7th in all these regards?
Yes, I'm happy to. So in the, Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship, we're used to being monitored. We're used to surveillance. It's just something that you become like, that it exists all the time. The problem was in the aftermath of October the 7th, it was a combination of state apparatus as well as private citizens who then started to come after Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship. And I'm going to give you a few examples. So first is one thing that started to happen was that immediately, and I know that Adi spoke a little bit about this, but immediately on October 7th, and then remember, Israel started bombing Gaza practically immediately. And so if you were somebody who had expressed any solidarity or any concern or any worry about what Israel's doing in Gaza, and remember, many of us have friends and family in Gaza. For me, from Haifa to Gaza, it's 180 kilometers. It's not like this isn't the other end of the world. I have friends in Gaza because I used to live there. Everybody I know knows somebody in Gaza. And so in the aftermath of like October 7th onward, we started to see that it was the Israeli police and other Israeli institutions, state institutions and otherwise, that began monitoring our social media feeds. In some cases, if you liked a picture, like just a like, you put a little like on Instagram of a picture, it was cause for dismissal from jobs, or to face disciplinary measures from your university. Now, Bassam, the important part in all of this is, remember, there was no, the universities, the semester hadn't even started for the students. So students were being disciplined not for anything that they did on campus, but only for social media feeds. So we saw that people were being monitored, and there were two very well-known cases of, actually a few well-known cases, but I'll give you an example of three. One was the singer Dalal Abu Amni, who posted on, I believe it was on Facebook, La Ghalib illallah, with the Palestinian flag emoji. There is no victor but God. And somebody took a screenshot of her La Ghalib illallah sign. And as a result, she started to get, it spread around, and Israelis spread it on all these social media platforms. She started to get death threats for La Ghalib illallah. That's all she wrote. There's no victor but God. Not only did she get death threats, but she was then arrested and thrown in prison for a social media post. Get this is the best part. As she was complaining to the police about the death threats that she had received from Israelis. So instead of the Israelis being gone after for issuing death threats against her, these were like very prominent death threats against her husband, against her children, they instead arrested her and threw her in prison. And since that time, the charges have since been dropped. But since the end of October, since October the 30th, until the current day, there is a nightly protest in front of her house with everything being done in front of her house, saying that she should be raped, that she should be sent to Gaza, that she should be expelled. The mayor of Afule has run an entire campaign. We have elections, municipal elections coming up at the end of this month. He's run his entire campaign on how he should expel her from her, and her family should be expelled from Afule. They've changed the name of her street to the IDF Street, Israeli Army Street. And every night she hears this barrage of hate in front of her house. Her water's been cut off, all because of La Ghalib illallah. That's one. The second was an actress, a Palestinian actress, Maysa Abdel Hadi, who put two Instagram posts up that very quickly then took them down. One of them was a picture of the now very famous picture of the bulldozer going through the fence in Gaza. And she said, "Let's do it Berlin style." And for that, Maysa was also arrested and thrown in prison. There was a third person, a lawyer, who tried to organize an anti-war protest and was thrown in prison for 121 days. And the point of all of this is to try to shut down any discussion, any dissent, anything that against what Israel's doing. And not only is it an attempt to crush you, but if you express any solidarity with Palestinians, if you express any concern about this genocide that Israel is carrying out, then again, you are liable to be thrown in prison. And now Israeli lawmakers are even talking about, lawmakers are now even talking about stripping citizenship of people who, quote unquote, support who supported October 7th. And as you know, just from what I've talked about, their idea of support is very loose. Saying something like "La ghalib illallah" means that you support October the 7th. And so all of it is that the idea is that you're supposed to, again, somehow fit within and accept what Israel has done to you or to your family or to your town or to your homeland. And if you don't, then again, you should be expelled. Your citizenship is only as good and is only conditional upon you being quiet or about you accepting what Israel did. But, you know, Bassam, I also want to be clear in saying that this isn't just what the state authorities have done. In particular, the posts that were put up by Mesa and by Dalal Abu Amni, the reason that the police found out about them was because we also see that there are militias that have formed throughout the country that have been taking screenshots of social media, passing it on to the police. And the fascinating thing is that there are so many people, so many Israelis who are genocidal. This isn't just a question of their leaders being genocidal. Believe me, it's all over the place. You see it everywhere you go. As somebody who lives in Haifa, I can tell you about the number of genocidal signs that I've seen, the number of statements that I've heard. In fact, there was one picture that was right at the entrance to my neighborhood. It was a picture of a number of the Israeli captives, and written over top of it is the statement in Hebrew, "Death to Arabs." Hearing "death to Arabs" is commonplace here in the country. You hear it all the time. And so you're constantly hearing and feeling these genocidal statements. And instead of the police going after those individuals for making open statements of harm against individuals, they instead go after people who write posts that say "La ghalib illallah." It's happened to others. It's happened to me personally. But we're now living, as we always have been living, in a place and space where all of your activity is monitored, and where the slightest things are questioned and challenged. So you know, we've heard of cases where people have been taking a break from their job and happen to look at Al Jazeera. Well, that's considered sympathizing with October 7th, sympathizing with Hamas, and people being fired from their jobs. And to be honest, I fear that this isn't the end. This isn't the end, because our citizenship is not only so conditional, but because Israel has made us that we are the fifth column, and we're treated as such and called as such. This isn't just going to end with what Israel's doing in Gaza. It's not going to end with what Israel's just doing in Gaza.
We have a lot of comments which we will come to. I think we will have time for a couple of the questions, which I will ask people to present by adding the word question up front in the YouTube feed in particular, so we can identify the questions as opposed to comments. Diana, how did and how do Israelis justify what has been happening since October, and notably in November and after, when the number of killed Palestinians by Israeli military and bombing has surpassed 5, 10, 15, 20, 25,000. How do they justify this? It's something that we see on social media. We see some of the really horrible manifestations of this. If someone says in Israel, well, they deserve it, and that's that. it doesn't always make it to social media. And I'm not saying this is okay. I'm just trying to understand from somebody who's lived there, ordinary Israelis, how do they actually justify it in day-to-day conversation?
It's such a great question, Bassam, and it's so depressing to hear and depressing to answer. So, a few things. Either you might find this surprising, or maybe you don't. Many Israelis have tuned out, and Palestinians are just it's just a number, and of course we're not numbers. So the death toll is just numbers. They don't care. They those who are tuning in will justify it as everybody is a terrorist. Some of them do that. Some of them say we have to hit Palestinians hard so that there's a deterrence. But again, like all of those ways of justifying it is a form of dehumanization. And that's what it means to be living as a Palestinian in Israel amongst Israelis. For Israel Israelis have to live with a whole lot of like with blinders on because you can't look around and not see Palestine. You can't. And yet the only way that they do this is by living with blinders on, like blocking out Palestinians or dehumanizing Palestinians. And both are really a way of dehumanizing Palestinians. So here's what I hear on a daily basis. One is you'll hear people on the news say, we're not hitting them hard enough. There should be 100,000 dead by now. This is nightly, by the way. This isn't like once in a blue moon. And it's not just by the politicians, it's also by the newscasters. That's one thing. We then hear a lot of people who will say, well, they deserve it. Then we'll hear a lot of people who justify it as somehow this is Hamas. They believe a lot of the Israeli propaganda. And I think because they want to believe the Israeli propaganda. They don't want to look further. They don't want to question, because questioning means questioning exactly what they did in 1948. Because it's the same. It was the same. Different scale, different tactics, but the same. How do you get rid of 750,000 Palestinians in a place? You do it by terrorizing them. And how do you do the same in Gaza? By terrorizing them. So for many of them, it's just one process of dehumanization after another, or it's completely ignoring it. You know, one thing that was interesting, Bassam, is at the beginning, in the first, I think it was 3 weeks, actually I remember exactly the day, in the first 3 weeks where we were at, Israel had killed 7,000 Palestinians. On TV, you know what they showed? 7,000 terrorists killed. Half of them were children, by the way. And on the news, it showed up as 7,000 terrorists killed. So for them, it's just this process of constantly dehumanizing. But, you know, Bassam, that's the state. The state operates on a system of Jewish privilege. If you are Jewish, you are privileged in the state. And so that then extends down to Palestinian lives not being privileged and therefore not mattering. So it doesn't matter for them that they've killed close to 30,000 Palestinians. You know, there's over 100,000 Palestinians who've been killed or injured. Leave aside that they've destroyed the largest Palestinian city, which is Gaza City. It doesn't register for them because when you live in a society of Jewish privilege, you privilege and think about what's happening to one side, and you don't think or care about what's happening to Palestinians. And that's the way that they've been doing it.
Thanks, Diana. Let me just circle back. And I actually never liked the term circle back, so I apologize for using it, or the phrase.
Back circle.
Yeah. Let me just go back a little bit and ask you a more foundational question, which I will be asking everyone who addresses this topic, and that is how or what are the laws and regulations, injunctions, and even practices, or mainly practices actually, that distinguish between Arab and Jewish citizens of the state, or Palestinian and Jewish citizens of the state of Israel? It's a question that we keep hearing, and it is something that, of course, exists before October 7th. And sometimes it's very difficult for some people to learn that there is a history before October 7th, which actually is the context within which everything else occurred. Nonetheless, over and above the past 4 months, what are these regulations? How do they distinguish between these two groups of people?
Okay, so this is great. So there are different ways in which the Israeli state distinguishes and discriminates in terms of law. And there's about Adalah, ADALAH.org. They maintain a database of all of the discriminatory laws and regulations, and it's something like 60. But I'm gonna break it down even simpler, because it gets a lot into the legal stuff. And so there are laws that discriminate on their face, and then there are laws that discriminate in practice. And so I'm going to talk about both of them. So the laws that discriminate on their face. There's two main laws that discriminate on their face. And the first one is the law of return. And the law of return says that anybody who is Jewish from anywhere around the world has the ability to immigrate to Israel. Okay, that's it. It doesn't say anybody who is a descendant of Palestine has the ability to return. It gives the ability for anybody who's Jewish from anywhere around the world to come into the country. That obviously excludes, on its face, people who are Palestinian. So what that means is that if, for example, you are a Palestinian and you have somebody, you marry somebody who is outside, they have to apply through a process of like naturalization, the equivalent of naturalization, to be able to get citizenship. That's not the case if you're Jewish. If you're Jewish, where it discriminates directly on its face. But then I want to go into other laws where it's not on its face, but where it is in practice. And here's where you're going to see just how this system of Jewish supremacy, of Jewish privilege, actually works. So there is a law, for example, that's called the Admissions Committee Law. And what the Admissions Committee Law says is that if your community is of a certain size, then that community can determine who gets to live inside of that community. All right. So this should be setting off all sorts of alarm bells in the minds of people. It's very reminiscent of the United States many, many, many moons ago. And probably still to this day, that we just don't see. But this is on its law, on its face, like in practice, on a law where it says that these committees have the ability to determine who is appropriate to live within their community. And this particular case, there was a challenge of this law before the Israeli Supreme Court. And here's where the court said, okay, yes, we have to decide whether Israel's a Jewish state or whether it's a democracy. And of course, they chose Jewish state. And they said that yes, people should be able to choose who their neighbors are. Now, remember, the law doesn't say you can't have, it's forbidden to have Palestinians living in these areas. But guess what's happened in practice? In practice, the law has been used against Palestinians.
Mm.
Right? Now, this same law, of course, it can be used against people who are Black. It can be used against people who are members of the LGBTQ community. It could be used against all sorts. But in practice, who's it been used against? Palestinians. And what is it that the court said, again referring to being against Palestinians, that people should have the ability to choose who their neighbors are. Now, here's again another interesting thing. In the aftermath, as we've seen this government since 2023 take shape, this admissions committee law started off with only affecting a certain number of communities. Today, we're talking about it affecting something like 81% of communities in the country that are off limits to Palestinians, effectively. And that's why you see that Palestinians are concentrated in major areas, in major centers, because those are the areas from which they were not ethnically cleansed in 1948. But I want to get even further and look at the way that the state operates. And I can take, for example, Nazareth, which is my parents' hometown. In Nazareth, there are a number. Nazareth is the largest Palestinian city. It's got about close to 80,000 people living in the city. But the city is the same size as it was in 1948. In fact, it's actually smaller than it was in 1948, because in 1948, Israel expropriated all of the land surrounding the city of Nazareth. And so the city of Nazareth today is home to around 80,000 people. They're people who were ethnically cleansed from the villages of Al-Mjadid, where my family's from, Ma'lul, right across the street from my parents' town, Safuriye, all living in Nazareth. And on smaller land, 75 years later, you see just how crowded Nazareth has become. And yet the lands of Nazareth have been taken over by to make a Jewish Israeli town called Nazareth Elite. They recently changed the name to Nof Hagarin, which has it's 3 times the size of Nazareth and has 1/3 of the population. But it gets even further than that. You look at all of these Palestinian towns where you see that it's because it's so difficult to buy land, because so much of it is held in the hands of the state, that people end up building up. You end up having these very overcrowded cities, that the infrastructure that's in these cities cannot sustain these populations. Since 1948, Israel has not opened up a single hospital in any Arab town. The hospitals that are in Nazareth predate the establishment of the state of Israel. And so this is the way that it is in everyday life. In everyday life, you're always confronted with this reality that you are considered less, that there is a system of Jewish privilege and Jewish supremacy that reigns supreme, that you are always less. And if you dare speak up, if you dare, voice your dissent, then you see the state machinery come down, crashing down against you. So for the state, they're fine with you being an Arab. But the minute that you define yourself as Palestinian, the minute that you push for rights, the minute that you critique, criticize, demand accountability for the Nakba, the minute that you are trying to stop this genocide, is the minute that this state apparatus, coupled with your neighbors, come after you. And I think I wasn't sure if I mentioned this, but when I was mentioning militias, Bassam, I don't know if you know this, but there are now militias that
Mm.
operate in all of the cities now. Like in Haifa, you can see people walking around with weapons and like and wearing like vests, these sort of protection vests, claiming that they're protecting us. And yet what they're also doing is they're also trolling your social media feed and placing you on a watch list, as I and others have been placed on these watch lists with our names referred to the police for arrest.
Thank you very much, Diana. This is a lot of insights, and I have so many questions. But I know that you and I discussed a couple of things prior, including how will this play out going forward, um, in terms of the conditional citizenship of Palestinians, because technically they do have a citizenship, and in terms of accepting Zionism going forward, where do you see this going? And I always say that I don't like saying when the dust settles, because we're still witnessing daily slaughter. But where is this going in a future state?
Nowhere good. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if the next phase of this genocide is is going to be. I mean, I'm certain of it. The next phase is going to be focused on the West Bank, but I don't think that it's going to stop there either. I think that Palestinians in Israel are also going to continue to be the target of Israel's wrath, and they're going to continue to try to pass more and more and more laws designed to either shut down dissent, or even more, try to strip away citizenship from people. We've already seen it with the cases of Karim and Maher Yunus, two Palestinians who languished in Israeli prisons for more than 40 years. The Israelis are already talking about stripping them of citizenship and sending them to the West Bank. And I can just see that this is going to be yet another step, yet another step, yet another step, because that's what their aim is they don't want any reminders of 1948. In fact, the only reminder that they want is that they were victorious. And when you hear people like the finance minister Smotrich saying that the only reason that we remain is because Ben Gurion didn't finish the job in 1948. When you hear Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Minister of Public Security, saying that he needs to show us who the master of the house is, I just don't see that this is going in any way that is positive. And in fact, I really do think that this next phase is going to be about targeting Palestinians a lot. I can't say en masse or one by one, but targeting Palestinians in order to, again, quash dissent and to Zionize them, And look, I have to say, for as much as they've tried to Zionize Palestinians, it's not worked, because Zionism is a bad product, and you can't sell a bad product. But as much as they've tried, it hasn't worked. But yet they still keep trying to use the full weight of the state to crush us.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions from actually different platforms, and we sometimes get questions directly to the Jadaliya email account. So before I actually take questions, is there anything else you'd like to add on the topic of conditional citizens before we go to questions?
That's it. I hope I've got everything that I wanted to say.
Okay. So let me take some of these questions. One of them is, does the state target dissident Jews in the same authoritarian ways, or even in ways that are somewhat comparable to dissidents among Palestinians?
Oh, definitely not. Look, since October 7th, there was one person who was targeted because of the fact that he spoke out against the war. But no matter what, it's never the same. It's never going to be the same, because the viewpoint is that it's the Palestinians who are the quote unquote threat. That the other like expressions of dissent in their minds is just that, it's an expression of dissent. But for us, it's this idea that we're a threat. We're an actual threat. We're a demographic threat. We're a security threat. This is the way they define it. And so while people who are dissidents they've received some, let's say, they haven't been treated well, it's still never the same as Palestinians in Israel. Palestinians in Israel, remember, this is the whole idea is to denationalize as a group, and to strip away the so-called rights, because they think that they've been generous with us when they haven't, of an entire group rather than of individuals.
There is a couple of questions that we got on actually on email, talking about Zionism and the different strands of Zionism. And I think I'm trying to make it out, but I'll add to it sort of what I'm gathering from the tenor. Given that there are different strands of Zionism historically, are we seeing a convergence? And we may have seen this before, but are we seeing in this particular moment a convergence of sorts regarding certain definitions?
Look, to me, Zionism is Zionism. And there's always this attempt to split hairs of what type of Zionism. But for us as Palestinians, Zionism is what is the ideology behind kicking us out of our homeland. It's the ideology behind destroying more than 500 Palestinian villages and towns. It's the ideology of trying to crush us. It's the ideology of that it's okay to kill Palestinians. So I never get into this discussion about like the fine hairs and the strands of Zionism. It doesn't concern me, because as somebody who's lived with Zionism and under Zionism, you can try to split it however way you want it. It's whether you're being shot in the head or being stabbed with a knife. At the end of the day, you're still being harmed. And that's what Zionism is for Palestinians. It's about harm. It's about superiority. And I get tired of this like attempts to split hairs of, is it cultural Zionism versus, it's all, for us, we've experienced Zionism literally on our skin.
Diana, I want to ask you something that, based on your going back and forth, you live in Haifa and you frequent the United States. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've experienced? I mean, of course, you could also gather some of this from social media and so on. To what extent do you find in the United States an atmosphere that resembles, at least in corporate and mainstream media, government, and so on, that resembles what you see in Israel, and where do you see a divergence?
In terms of the way that the way that Israel's covered, or
yeah, in terms of what is happening and how this slaughter, this massacre, this genocide is covered in either place.
That's a really good question, Bassam. Thank you. Look, it's covered the same. That's the sad reality. It's important for people to understand. I know many people read the Israeli version of Haaretz. The Israeli version of Haaretz is not the entire translation of the entire newspaper, number one. And two, it's the least read newspaper in the country. So while it has a lot of readership outside of the country, it is literally the least read newspaper in the country. Why do I say this? Because in Haaretz, you will see the occasional article that is critical of Israel. And it's usually by one of two people, Amir Haas or Gideon Levy. Those are the two who are the most critical. But that's it. If you go into the regular mainstream Israeli media of print or broadcast, it's virtually all the same. And the print and broadcast media is usually a rallying media. It's propaganda media. You never see pictures of Palestinians there. You don't hear about what Israel is doing to Palestinians. And we are so invisible to them in the mainstream media, not just during this genocide, but even before. Many Israelis don't, even though the occupation Israel's been carrying out this occupation now for 56, we're now in the 57th year. Most Israelis don't care. They don't look, they don't care, because it effectively doesn't affect them. And then if it did, we're to blame. Now, if you look at the Western media and the way that the Western media has been covering it, it's largely the same. We don't see the same images that we're seeing on social media. We don't see the same commentary. We see instead a lot of analysis, a lot of mental gymnastics, trying to justify whether it's okay to bomb a hospital. A lot of words used to try to avoid using the term killing, genocide, child even. There's like minors. And so the same techniques of dehumanization of Palestinians that Israel uses are very much being copied by the Western media. And this is why it's, I feel that people have become so desensitized to what Israel is doing. We're living, Bassam, in a time where we're watching genocide. We're watching it play out live. And we're watching people broadcast their own the destruction of their place, of their families, of their lives, and people are immune to it. And instead, as I said, we see a lot of mental gymnastics to try to get around all of this stuff, and it's so alarming, and it's all based on the dehumanization of Palestinians, where Israel has set the way, and the Western media picks it up.
I would like to ask a question about the left, and I know that this is no longer as much of a nuanced thing as may perhaps before. So there are two things. On the one hand, there has been and always has been this dichotomy in the United States between people who say, "Oh, it's." I mean, those of us who say this is a system of apartheid, it's basically a history of dispossession and ethnic cleansing, and so on and so forth. And then there are others who wish to pinpoint and confine the problems that Israel has to the leadership of Netanyahu or the Likud or something of the sort, right? Which, I mean, I hate to say this, but the one thing that we've discovered in the past few months, not we, those who have known the difference, but others, that this is not necessarily a question of a particular strand of the Israeli polity or leadership. It's actually what Israel is. Now, all along, however, before that, we used to hear about the existence of a left in Israel. And we, as you know, there are magazines like 972 and there are human rights organizations and there are circles that actually even now continue to be critical. But in general, beyond those islands, can you tell us a little bit about the status of the left generally and in particular today? And what does that mean? That if the status is almost non-existent today, in an institutional and effective manner, what does that mean to the future of what we can expect in Israel, especially for Palestinians?
I used to say that the left quickly because they did. There kind of really is no left in Israel. There's a critical left, a critical left that understands that Israel is a society that is founded, the whole country was founded on the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. There are some of them. But for the most part, those numbers are very, very, very small, very small. And the reason that those numbers are small is because this is a society that lives through propaganda. Its foundation is on the basis of propaganda, like to maintain its maintenance is on the basis of propaganda. And it requires a lot of thinking to break through that propaganda. So there isn't really a strong left. There's a critical left, but it's very small in numbers. I'm going to give you, Bassam, an example so that you can see the difference between the two. So in Israeli politics, Netanyahu is considered right wing, and then of course there's the fascist right wing of Smotrich, Ben Gvir, and so on. But then you go down to what people refer to as the center, right? The center, and sometimes they're referred to as the center left or just the center. And I'm going to talk about the center, and then I'm going to talk about the center left. The center would be something like the Labour Party. Now, so that you understand how not left they are, the center is, this center is the same center that believes in fact, they're the ones who started the settlement project. The most number of settlements have gone under the Labour governments, And this same center is the center that during this attack on Gaza has been saying, hit them harder, hit them faster, hit them more. But I then want to take you to what they call the left wing, right? The center, what I was talking about, center left, sorry. The left wing, which people would define as Meretz in the country. Meretz is also Zionist in its nature. But I want you to also understand how they operate. This is a left-wing party that has voted in favor of continuing the occupation. It's a left-wing party that has voted in favor of some of the most racist pieces of legislation. Why? Because they wanted to maintain themselves in the coalition. And so there really is no real left wing as defined or as represented in any political movement inside the country. Instead, you get these small little pockets of people who are left and who understand Israel, how Israel was founded, its foundation, and what it needs to happen. But those voices are so marginalized and so small that I don't think we do anybody a service if we lionize them, if we turn them into something big, because they really are small voices. We're very appreciative, but they are very small voices, and their voices should not be amplified or platformed at the expense of Palestinian ones, because they really are not representative of anything but a very, very, very small movement. Again, appreciative, but they are those voices are small.
Diana, thank you so much for all these insights, and I really appreciate it, because there are all these assumptions about what goes on in terms of the status of Palestinians in Israel, and this really unpacks so much of it for us. I would like to ask you one thing before I sort of let you go and enjoy the rest of your day. Has there been any notable migration or plans for migration? Has there been any kind of activity regarding people reconsidering Israel as a destination? Both of these things. Have you seen or heard, especially on Israeli media, of anything regarding the question of Israel is a safe haven, and people sort of go to Israel, as opposed to now where there are skirmishes? We hear about hesitance and so on. Or is this statistically still insignificant?
We don't know yet. Um, so usually in the next few months, then I think it's around April this year, they reveal the statistics of the number of people who have immigrated versus emigrated. And but I can tell you what the atmosphere is like. And the atmosphere is that many people are now talking about leaving. Look, there's no way, even like this, what this genocide is doing, even if you look at it from a selfish Israeli perspective, which many of them do, there's no way that this is going to lead to any good. Zero. There's zero way that it's going to lead to any good. And I think some of them see it. Again, I'm talking about the self-interested Israeli. I'm not talking about the humanitarian. I'm not talking about what it means as a Palestinian. But just in the self-interested Israeli, this genocide is there's no way it's going to lead to good. The country's credit rating has dropped. It's very expensive. They're always going to be living in a sense of fear. They're always going to be living in a sense where they have to block out that they just perpetrated and supported genocide from being carried out. And it's just, I don't think it's something that in the long term, obviously it's not, obviously what Israel is doing and has done is devastating for Palestinians. And so I don't think that this is, I think that we're going to see more and more Israelis who are going to decide to leave, and fewer people who are Jewish who decide that they want to move to this racist fascist state.
Well, we will speak with you again, I hope. And I
Thank
keep saying under better circumstances. It was lovely speaking with you, and thank you for coming back again after last week, because I know there was a situation, an unavoidable situation.
Mhm.
And I hope to actually continue this conversation with our other colleagues who will join us next Thursday at 1 p.m. Here on Jalalia's YouTube, Twitter, Facebook channels under the project Gaza and Context, the collaborative teaching project. I'd like to thank everybody who helped make this happen. I really dislike the fact, but I have no choice, that we can't all be here on camera to take credit, but there are a ton of people working on these projects and teachings and editing and social media that I would like to feature. We actually will be featuring some conversations with them, which I have already held a part of them, so I will be featuring those. And Diana, you are always welcome to join us and share with us with your lucid logic and presentations what is going on inside or outside Israel. And hope you stay safe, and that you would join us again.
Thank you, Bassam. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Shukran.
Shukran.